Hey everyone, SunTide here. Hope you all are doing great. So today, we are finally going to answer a question that I think we have all been curious about ever since we first saw the arcane weapons in Monster Hunter Wilds. And that is, how strong is status really in Monster Hunter Wilds? I mean, obviously the answer is very, but also it may not be as strong as you think it is. That's what we're going to be getting to in this video. So this video will be in two parts. So in the first part, we'll be talking about how status actually works in the game, and then, knowing that, we'll start talking about how we can estimate the damage from status effects, and compare that to element and other methods of doing damage. Okay, so the most basic introduction is that when you have a melee weapon that has some status, so right now I have 170 poison, every around third attack on average, I'll get a little small particle effect, I'll get some purple, you can see it in those last two we got it. So we get this little purple particle effect, and whenever that happens, we inflict a tiny bit of status buildup onto the monster. If I use a ranged weapon, I need to use the specific ammo or coating, and those are guaranteed. So if I swap to my heavy bowgun, I have paralysis ammo, and when I attack the monster, you can see the effect much more clearly, and eventually, I get a status effect. For what it's worth, the paralysis animation on the training dummy is amazing if you've never seen it before. Like, this guy is just like panicking and then crawls back on. Okay, so once we build it past this threshold, the monster is inflicted with the status. There are 4 statuses, and I like to split them up into 2 types. So there is Poison and Blast, which both directly damage the monster. So Poison in high rank does 15 damage every second for 15, 20, or 30 seconds, depending on the monster. And Blast does 100 damage whenever it activates. Now, Blast is usually easier to activate to compensate for its lower damage, but it gets harder to activate in the long run than Poison. In general, Poison does more damage, but not always. The nicer thing about Blast is it does do damage to parts, so if you want to break a lot of parts, Blast can be more fun, and the booms are always cool, but usually Poison is going to be a bit better. Now, the other 2 statuses, which are usually going to be stronger, are Paralysis and Sleep. They debilitate the monster, they stop it from attacking for a while, which lets you do a lot more damage with a really strong weapon. So Paralysis stops the monster from moving for a while, so that's what we saw here, and Sleep makes the monster enter a sleeping animation, and once it's asleep, your next attack does double damage on the first hit. So Sleep is powerful if you can land big hits. It's also nice because you have a small break to sharpen or heal up. But Paralysis is stronger in general. Usually you can get more damage off of Paralysis than Asleep if you don't have that one big hit. It's also better for multiplayer if you can't trust your teammates to take advantage of the Sleep. If you're coordinated, then you can always use both. But so Paralysis and Sleep are usually pretty comparable if you can use them properly, but often there's one you can do a bit better than the other. So, how does the actual build-up work? Okay, let's go into a bit more detail. So every monster has 3 parameters that help decide how often it'll get statused. So we call these parameters the initial tolerance, the tolerance increase, and the max tolerance. The initial tolerance is a number we need to beat for the first status application of each type. So for the first Poison or the first Blast or the first Paralysis. But when we beat the initial tolerance, the monster gets hit by the status. Now every time it gets hit by the status, the next one is a bit harder to do. The amount it gets harder by is the tolerance increase, and that'll keep on increasing until we hit the tolerance maximum. Now in addition to that, every 10 seconds the status we do is going to decrease by 5, so if we take a long time to do a status, it'll be harder to do that same status level. As for the numbers that we actually do, it depends on whether we're melee or ranged. So for a melee weapon, if you pause the screen, you can see your element. So right now I have 170 element. That means that whenever we do inflict a status, we do this number divided by 10. So we'll do 17 status build up, which we want to hit to be that threshold that we want. It's worth mentioning that different arcane weapons have drastically different status values. So great swords are really, really high and dual blades are really, really low. We'll get to that in more detail later on though. Now for bowguns, it's a bit simpler. So level 1 ammo does 40 status and level 2 ammo does 80 status. And they're always guaranteed, which means it's usually a lot easier to get statuses off. Especially in a controlled manner by using your bowguns. Okay, so let's look at some actual numbers. So the training dummy has poison tolerances of 150, increasing by 100 to a maximum of 550, which means for the first status, we'll need 150. For the second status, it'll be 150 plus 100, which is 250. For the third status, it'll be 150 plus 100 plus 100, so 350, then 450, then 550, and 550 is going to be the maximum, so it'll be at 550 every single time. The total status that we need to get to each successive proc will be 150, then 400, so 150 plus 250, and it'll be 750, which is 150 plus 250 plus 350, and so on. Okay, so there are some takeaways from these numbers. One, having a really low status due to decay probably isn't going to be very useful. But on the other hand, having too high status probably isn't going to be too useful either, just because the thresholds are always increasing, and getting more and more statuses are going to be harder and harder. So oftentimes some sort of medium to medium high status values are going to be the nicest, but that means the question is, how do we know how much damage the status we do is really going to contribute? So that's what we're going to try and answer now. So what's our approach to be? How are we going to estimate our overall damage? Well, this is going to be our general approach. Say, just for example, we're fighting a really low HP monster with 3,300 health. Let's say in this hunt we get 2 blast procs, and if each blast proc does 150 damage, that means we get 300 damage from blast. Now that means instead of having to do 3,300 damage from raw, we only had to do 3,000 raw damage, which means that blast improved the damage by 3,300 divided by 3,000, or in other words, gave us a 10% damage increase, which is very nice. Now that's just going to be our example here. But the point is, we can calculate our overall damage improvement with just 2 things. So our status procs and our damage per proc, and the monster's overall HP. From these 2 things, we can figure out how much percent damage our status increases our overall damage by, and that's all we really need. Still, to calculate this thing, to calculate our status procs that we do in an entire hunt, we'll need a few more things. So we'll need to look at the monster tolerances, the monster HP, the average damage per hit, and the average status per hit. But from all of these guys, we can figure out our status damage. Now, if we're very careful, we can actually calculate this, our average damage per hit, by taking into things like your motion values, your hit zone values, your effective raw. More on that later. Let's say, for example, we know our average damage per hit. Okay? So let's say we're fighting a monster with 10,000 HP, higher now, and we're doing 100 damage per hit. Let's also say our weapon has 30 poison. So we do 30 poison every 3 hits or so, because there's a 1 in 3 chance of activating. And the monster's tolerance is going to be 150, increasing by 100 every time to 550. So this is the case for the training dummy at level 1. Now, we can calculate the amount of hits we do on the monster by dividing the monster's total HP by how much damage we do per hit. So 10,000 divided by 100 is going to be 100. So we know we do 100 hits. We know every 3rd hit is going to do 30 poison, so we go 100 times 30 divided by 3, which is 1,000. So we do 1,000 poison onto the monster. And because we know we do 1,000 poison, and we know our thresholds, so if the thresholds are 150 increasing by 100 up to 550, that means the first proc is going to need 150, the second proc is going to need 250, and then 350, then 450. The cumulative status we need is going to be 150, and then it's going to be 150 plus 250, or 400, and then it'll be 400 plus 350, or 750, and then 1200, and so on. If we have 1000 status, that means we'll be able to get 3 procs, and we'll get halfway to the 4th proc, but we'll only be doing 3 procs. Now, if we do 300 damage per poison, as we said before, that means we can say we did 900 poison damage, or a 10% bonus increase, like we said earlier. So, yes, all we need to do is to take into account our average damage per hit, HP thresholds, and our status per hit. And then we can calculate our overall damage increase. There are some things we missed. So we missed out on status decays, just to simplify things. So say the hunt took 5 minutes or 300 seconds, then the status would decay by 300 divided by 2 or 150. So instead of doing 1000 status build up, we'll only be doing 850. The other thing we missed is a bit more subtle. So say we did 900 poison damage, right? That means that instead of having to do 10,000 raw damage, we only had to do 9,100 raw damage. That was the whole point of this all. We do extra damage from poison. However, because we need to do less raw damage, that means we need to do less hits on the monster. Instead of doing 100 hits, we only need to do 91. And because we do fewer hits, we do less poison buildup. So we'll only do 910 poison instead of 1000. before decay, so this will be further decreased by 150. Now in this case it doesn't make a difference, but in many cases it can mean we'll be doing fewer status procs than we would before this sort of recalculation. It just means we need to recalculate a few times. Now, that is basically how it can calculate our overall status damage. And to be honest, none of this is too complicated, it's just tedious. Like everything we did was just addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Stuff that you could do when you were like 10 years old. There's just a lot of it you need to do. Especially if you want to look at every single monster, right? So we aren't going to do that. We aren't going to do that one by one. However, what I did do is I made a whole simulator to look at every single monster where you put in your average damage or your EFR, and then you can calculate how much improvement every status does. And this is fully available on Colab for free. There should be a description in the link below. So, by the way, if you know how to use Python and you've coded before, don't judge my code. I know it's very weird, but it worked. I did a weird thing because I didn't want to upload CSVs for everyone to upload themselves. So the CSVs are in a list of lists. It just worked, okay? So anyway, to use this, click the first block, press Shift and Enter, and you'll run this block. And you'll run this block, so do the first two. And now, so we can run this block. What we need to do is you need to put in our raw damage per hit, which I said is going to be about 100 for here. That's an estimate. You need to put in our element per hit, if you want to put that in and compare to element. You want to put in your status. So this is your visible status divided by 10 if you're doing a melee weapon. So I'm saying you have 100 visible status here. You want to put in your paralysis and sleep damage per proc. I'm going to say it's going to be around 1,000. I think it might be a bit high or maybe a bit low, but I think it's a nice estimate, nice round number to put in. And you want to, these last three things are less important. So rating adjustment is how hard the monster is going to be. So increase it by 1 if you're fighting a tempered monster, and increase it by 1 for every difficulty rating in investigation above 3. So this is going to be assuming we're fighting 5-star difficulty monsters that are tempered of any type. Players is how many hunters there are, so this is single player. Hunt time is how long the hunt is, so 5 minutes times 60 seconds is what I put in. And calc type, just leave that as 0. Now, this is used if you want to put in your raw damage per hit and your element per hit. If you know your EFR and your EFA, you can look at my element video if you want to see that in more detail. Hey, DreamingSunTide here. If you want to use this version of the code, you can calculate your EFR manually, or you can use one of these calculators that people have written and posted online. Malik B told me about their code first, but there's also this one by Vasaltor and this one by RayGR. This block of code will also need your damage type, so sever, shot, or blunt, but from that automatically calculates your raw and elemental damage using the optimal hit zones that I previously wrote up for Mobalytics and used in my element video. Links to all of those things in the description. I put in stuff for a raw optimized build, and I put in the element for the longsword in this build, and the longsword status, and the hit ratio. Check the element video for that as well. 3 is normal for stuff like the longsword. Put that all in. I'm going to run this one instead, so we can see what goes on, and then run this one, Shift and Enter as well. And what it tells you is it tells you for every single monster, so let's say for Uftuna right now, this tells you that for status, we're going to get 2 procs, and that's going to improve our damage by 7.7%. Blast will get 4 procs, and that'll improve our damage by 2.2%, and so on. It says that fire is going to give us a 4.4% damage improvement, thunder is going to give us a 6.6 damage improvement, but I think sleep is going to be the best one. Sleep and paralysis are tied for 7.7% damage improvement, because they both get 2 procs. So this is for every single monster. If you want to see it in a table, click this folder. There's a file called output CSV. I think you can download that, or you can just open it right here in the browser. So this shows for every single monster. We can look at different pages, and we can see how many procs there are for every status, how strong the elements are, and we can see what is optimal for every monster. So for New Udra, sleep's going to be the best. For what's this? Jindahad, fire is going to be the best. It's more readable if you download the CSV and open it in Google Sheets or something. But yeah, and this calculates it for every single monster for the parameters you put in. So this is what I thought is reasonable for longsword. For other weapons, you can put in other things. But for longsword at least, what I think is interesting is that So paralysis and sleep are in general going to be the strongest. So they're going to improve your damage by around 10% for every single monster pretty reliably. Sometimes less, sometimes more, but it's going to be around 10% every single time. For elements, sometimes it's going to be 0%. Sometimes it's going to be like 15%. You need to have specific elements for specific monsters, but more often than not, elements going to be stronger than status, which surprised me, to be honest. The problem is that, of course, you need to have specific elements. So on average, every individual element is going to be worse than paralysis and sleep. But if you have the time and effort to make every single element, that will outdamage your statuses more often than not. Of course, if you're only going to make one weapon, it should be a status weapon. And yeah, so we can change this for different weapons and stuff like that. So just scroll up to the variables. So if we're using a greatsword, for example, the status value of a greatsword is much higher. I think it's going to be 28, I believe. And the hit ratio is going to be lower, so it just does less element damage. We'll leave the rest for now, just so we can see what goes on. We'll run all this, we'll open our output.csv, and we see that paralysis is going to be improving our damage by a whole lot more than it did before. And element's going to improve our damage by less than we had before. We put in stuff for like the greatsword. For the dual blades, which is much more element focus. I think I said that this guy has a hit ratio of around 7. So more for what these values mean, check out the element video. Our status is going to be lower. I think it's going to be 7 if I remember right. Run all that. Check output.csv. And we can see that process damage is actually... okay, no, that's going to be pretty high actually, just because we're doing so much more status per hit. But our element improvement is going to be really high. So in basically every situation, an element's going to be optimal over a status for the dual blades, which we can see here. So yeah, you can change these things, play it around yourself, and make the numbers fit for your build and for your playstyle, which I think is really cool. So yeah, check out the link in the description and run this on Google Colab, and you should have a good time. So, one thing I did touch upon is that every RTN weapon has different elements and different statuses. Now, for elements, these are the values I spoke about in the element video. So greatsword starts with 48 element before reinforcements, dual blades with 27. What I think is really interesting and weird is that different statuses have different elements, different statuses have different values, and they're just the element values minus either 15 or 20. So Poison Blast or the element values minus 15, and Paralysis and Sleep are the element values minus 20. This means that Greatsword actually has really, really good status, as I said before. So for Paralysis and Sleep, you have 28, which is still pretty good compared to Dual Blades, which is 7. So Greatsword has like 4 times more element than the Dual Blades do, which I think is pretty crazy. If you compare it to the element, like the Greatsword is less than double the Dual Blades, but now it's 4 times the paralysis of the dual blades. It means there's a very big difference between all of them. But it's worth mentioning that in the middle ground, so longsword, which I calculated it for, again, elements are going to be stronger more often than not than paralysis and sleep. All the paralysis and sleep are going to be stronger on average if you're just going to make one. One more thing I want to quickly mention, you can eat for specialist meal by using wild seed oil, which will improve our status by 30 visible, which is very nice. I don't think there are too many things that are worth trading it for. I think the thing that I would usually eat for is going to be medic meal from the Eastern Honey, which improves our healing by 10%. The other stuff are nice, but not as nice as, well, specialist meal if you really want that extra 3 status. Stuff like paralysis attack or sweep attack probably aren't going to be worth using things like crit boost and whatever else. So if you just want a bit more status, eating for it's probably the way to go. But yeah, with that being said, I think that is the bulk of this video. So our main summary conclusions is that 1, status is inflicted after we pass some threshold, which increases every single time. But by knowing how many hits we do, we can figure out how many procs we do, and from knowing how many procs we do, we can figure out how much damage is improved. And in general, Procs and Sweep are going to be your best options for overall damage if you're just going to make one weapon. However, more often than not, different elements are going to be better so long as you aren't using something like the Greatsword. Not always, but very often, element will still be optimal if you are going to put in the effort to make every weapon. what it's worth, I was comparing to raw optimized element builds. If you want to optimize the element more, they're probably going to be even stronger against those specific monsters. More on that probably later on. I'm not sure if I'll get a full element build video done before Mizutsune comes out. If not, I will update it for Mizutsune after the fact. But yeah, so I thank all of you for watching, of course, as well as all of my Patreon supporters, especially Hunter Finney, who is my highest supporter tier. If you want to join these cool people, check out my Patreon link in the description. If you don't, thank you anyway. I really appreciate all of you watching all of my videos and all of those things. That being said, I hope you all have a great day, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.